What if the history books are lying? What if, underneath centuries of rewritten stories and deliberate cover-ups, lies a forgotten global empire? An advanced civilization with tech far beyond its time that was wiped from existence in a final cataclysmic war. This is the story they call Tartaria. Theorists claim a final apocalyptic war erased this worldwide, technologically superior civilization from the history books. They point to grand, orphaned architecture, old maps showing a vast and mysterious territory, and supposed evidence of a global mud flood as proof. But what if the evidence for this war has been hiding in plain sight the whole time? And what if the truth isn't some grand conspiracy, but a story of brutal conquest, mistaken identity, and a linguistic mix-up that's lasted for 800 years? We're about to reveal the one word that unlocks the true bloody history of the people they call Tartarians and proves there was no cover-up. So, before we get to that one word, let's get on the same page about the myth it absolutely dismantles. The Tartarian Empire, according to its modern fans, wasn't just another kingdom, it was a global civilization of incredible scale and sophistication. We're not talking about horse-drawn carts here. This was supposedly a civilization with advanced technology, stunningly uniform architecture, and maybe even free atmospheric energy. Theorists say the evidence is all around us. They argue that the magnificent, ornate buildings of the 18th and 19th centuries, from the great domed capitals in the US to grand structures across Europe and Asia, are not the work of their documented architects. No, they're the last surviving remnants of Tartaria. They see the similarities in style, the columns, the domes, the intricate metalwork, not as a sign of global trends, but as the signature of a single unified empire. Those metal spires on old buildings, not just decoration, they were part of a vast wireless energy grid. The strange buried ground floors of old buildings all over the world, what many call mud flood basements, are shown as definitive proof of a planet-wide cataclysm that buried Tartarian cities. And this leads to the heart of the myth, the final, terrible war. How could a superpower like this just vanish? Well, in the world of Tartarian lore, it couldn't be a simple human conflict. It had to be something more, something unhuman. The story goes that Tartaria was destroyed in a war against supernatural or even extraterrestrial forces. Some versions mention a battle against the biblical figures Gog and Magog, while others suggest non-human invaders were unleashed on the world, causing the mud floods and wiping Tartaria off the map. This wasn't just a war, it was an erasure. After the cataclysm, a new global power elite, the one we supposedly live under today, rose up. Their first job was to scrub Tartaria from history, claim its buildings as their own, and hide the truth of our advanced past. They allegedly even orchestrated events like the World Wars to destroy the last Tartarian structures and cement their new false history. It's an epic story. It taps into that feeling that the world is more mysterious than we're told, that history is a lie, and that humanity lost something profound. It paints this picture of a romantic, high-tech past that was stolen from us. It's a grand conspiracy that explains everything from old buildings to a general distrust of authority, and it is almost entirely, demonstrably, false. The entire foundation of this sprawling myth, the lost civilization, the mud flood, the supernatural war, and the global cover-up, can be dismantled with a single word. A word that has been in our history books all along, not as the hero of some lost golden age, but as one of the most terrifying and destructive forces humanity has ever known. That one word is Mongols. The story of the so-called Tartarians isn't about free energy and Greco-Roman buildings. It's the story of the Mongol Empire. And their final war wasn't against demons, it was against each other, and then against the entire known world. The truth isn't a hidden utopia, it's a story of brutal, bloody, and all too human conquest. To understand how the epic real history of the Mongols got twisted into the myth of Tartaria, we have to start with a map, or really, hundreds of maps. For centuries, European cartographers drawing Asia had a problem, a massive, gaping hole in their knowledge. This huge expanse, stretching from the Caspian Sea to the Pacific, was a place of rumor and legend. Not knowing what to call this enormous territory, they gave it a catch-all name, Tartary. The name itself came from a specific people, the Tatars, a group of Turkic-speaking tribes in northeastern Mongolia. But to Europeans, Tartar became a vague label for pretty much any nomadic person from the Asian steppe. If you look at maps from the 16th to the 19th centuries, you can literally watch Tartary shrink. As European explorers and Russian expeditions pushed east, the blank spaces got filled in. Chinese Tartary, independent Tartary, and Russian Tartary started to appear as geographers slowly figured out the complex web of cultures and khanates who actually lived there. Tartary was never a single unified empire. It was a European label for the parts of Asia we don't really know about yet. It was a geographic fiction, a placeholder for ignorance. An influential 1570 map by Abraham Ortelius labels the area Tartariae sive magni kami regni, or Tartary, or the Kingdom of the Great Khan. Here's the kicker. By 1570, the unified Mongol Empire of the Great Khan had been fragmented for 200 years. The map was already depicting a political reality that was long gone. This is the first critical mistake the Tartarian theory makes, confusing a vague European geographic term for a real unified empire. They look at these maps and see proof of a lost global power, when they're actually seeing a reflection of European ignorance about Asia. But the name itself holds the second key. Why Tartary with that extra R? In the 13th century, as Mongol armies stormed into Europe, leaving unimaginable devastation, terrified European chroniclers reached for a term to describe the horror. The invaders were called Tatars, but that name sounded dangerously close to a word from Greek mythology, Tartarus, the deepest, darkest pit of the underworld. The 13th century chronicler Matthew Paris wrote that this detestable nation of Satan poured forth like devils from Tartarus, so that they are rightly called Tartary or Tartarians. They were seen as a demonic horde, an army from hell itself. This linguistic accident forever linked the people of the steppe with a supernatural, hellish origin in the European imagination. This isn't evidence that the Tartarians fought against demons, it's evidence that Europeans thought they were demons. The myth takes this terrified medieval metaphor and reads it as literal fact.
So if Tartary was just a name on a map, who were the people who inspired all this terror? The answer lies with a tribal confederation called the Tatars, who, in the 12th century, were a major power on the Mongolian plateau. They were rivals, and often bitter enemies, of a rising Mongol clan led by a man named Temujin. The Tatars had poisoned his father and had a history of betraying his ancestors. For Temujin, this was a blood debt, and in 1202 he decided to collect. This is the final war of the Tartarian myth, but it wasn't a war against demons. It was a brutal campaign of annihilation waged by one steppe tribe against another. Temujin allied with a neighboring tribe and marched on the Tatars. The resulting battle was a complete destruction of the Tatar Confederation. But victory wasn't enough. Temujin ordered that every single Tatar male taller than a cart linchpin be executed. It was a methodical, ruthless act designed to erase the Tatars as a people. The surviving women and children were absorbed into Temujin's own tribe. The original Tatars were finished. 4 years later, in 1206, Temujin would be proclaimed Genghis Khan, ruler of all the Mongols. And here's the historical irony. The people whose name became synonymous with the Mongol invaders in the West were actually one of their first and most thoroughly conquered victims. Because Tatar warriors were absorbed and often put in the vanguard of the Mongol armies, their name traveled with the conquests. To the Russians, Persians, and Europeans, the invaders were all Tatars. The name of the vanquished had become the name of the vanquisher. The conquests that followed make the fictional wars of the Tartarian myth look pale. The Mongol Empire became the largest contiguous land empire in human history. This was the real global power of the era. Their campaigns were a terrifying display of military genius and psychological warfare. When the Mongol Golden Horde, led by Genghis Khan's grandson Batu, invaded the Russian principalities in 1237, it was a cataclysm. They sacked city after city, and in 1240, the great city of Kiev was utterly destroyed. The period that followed is known in Russian history as the Tatar-Mongol yoke, 2 centuries of vassalage to the Khans. There were no mud floods, no aliens, there was just the relentless, overwhelming force of the Mongol army. This is the brutal reality the Tartarian myth tries to replace. It trades a documented history of human conquest, of ambition, revenge, and unparalleled military strategy for a vague fantasy of a lost utopia. The terror the Mongols inspired was real. The final war was real. But it was a war of arrows, horses, and steel, not magic and demons. The whole Tartarian conspiracy hinges on this idea of a supernatural final war. But as we've seen, this idea comes from a medieval misunderstanding. The European perception of the Mongols as demons from Tartarus wasn't based on eyewitness accounts of monsters. It was a metaphor born of pure terror. Put yourself in the shoes of a 13th century European. A force of seemingly unstoppable horsemen appears from the east, a land you only know from myths. They fight with a ferocity you've never seen, destroying kingdoms and slaughtering populations. In a world steeped in religion, how else do you explain